advantage on the rest of the viewers because you'll know what's happening. I will do a repeat for those of you watching without sound, and of course if you are watching without sound you have little to no idea, unless you are very gifted lip readers, little to no idea about what I'm actually saying. And I promise to repeat my introduction for those of you who can't hear me. So for those of you watching on platforms other than YouTube, can you please let us know once you get sound, or if you can hear me. It's great to have that information. And while you're at it, don't forget to send through your questions and your comments to #SafariLive on Twitter, or you can email through to questions@wildearth.tv. The joys of live safaris and all of the technological advances that we have made does mean every now and again things go just ever so slightly wrong. Leopard, in fact, a Karula's daughter in the case of Tundi, crossed into a Voyatella. Oh dear. Okay, well it sounds as though there isn't any sound and that you can't hear me, so hi! We're going to try and fix things. Welcome.
Not on our side, they got levels.
Cool. Perfect. Now that's interesting. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, or possibly watching on YouTube, apparently you have sound, so at least you caught my introduction. And you know you've got a sort of added advantage on the rest of the viewers because you'll know what's happening. I will do a repeat for those of you watching without sound, and of course if you are watching without sound you have little to no idea, unless you are very gifted lip readers, little to no idea about what I'm actually saying. And I promise to repeat my introduction for those of you who can't hear me. So for those of you watching on platforms other than YouTube, can you please let us know once you get sound, or if you can hear me. It's great to have that information. And while you're at it, don't forget to send through your questions and your comments to #SafariLive on Twitter, or you can email through to questions@wildearth.tv. The joys of live safaris and all of the technological advances that we have made does mean every now and again things go just ever so slightly wrong. A leopard, in fact, a Karula's daughter in the case of Tundi, crossed into a Voyatella. A leopard, in fact, a Karula's daughter in the case of Tundi, crossed into a Voyatella. Oh dear. Okay, well, it sounds as though there isn't any sound and that you can't hear me, so hi! We're going to try and fix things. Welcome.
Not on our side, they got levels.
Cool. Perfect. Now that's interesting. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube or possibly watching on YouTube, apparently you have sound, so at least you caught my introduction. And you know you've got a sort of added advantage on the rest of the viewers because you'll know what's happening. I will do a repeat for those of you watching without sound. And of course, if you are watching without sound, you have little to no idea, unless you are very gifted lip readers, little to no idea about what I'm actually saying. And I promise to repeat my introduction for those of you who can't hear me. So for those of you watching on platforms other than YouTube, can you please let us know once you get sound or if you can hear me. It's great to have that information.
At least a large bull and a little calf and a female giraffe who the bull is trying to attend to with a great enthusiasm. But
A leopard, in fact, a Karula's daughter in the case of Tundi, crossed into a Voyatella. Oh dear. Okay, well, it sounds as though there isn't any sound and that you can't hear me, so hi! We're going to try and...
entirely unusual. Djuma is not a huge piece of land. If you come on safari here, you will traverse a lot more land than we do. We traverse 1,500 hectares. You'd probably traverse about 3 or 4 times that, in which case you would definitely see a male lion in the course of a 3 or 4 day safari. This just seems to be, at the moment, between two territories. Now, should the Salati males push further south and start roaring, I've no doubt the Birmingham boys would come north and there would be a conflagration and we'd see both of them. But at the moment, that just isn't happening. And the Birmingham boys are not feeling that this part of their territory is threatened, and so they're not bothering to come up here and defend it. They're lurking further south, where there is a bit more threat from the southern animals in the Sabi Sands, and also possibly from the Western Majingalan coalition. I think that's the best answer I can give you at the moment. But there are plenty of male lions around in the Sabi Sands, Ryan. Especially down in the south. Now, Jamie was walking through this bush area here this morning, and she, on her walk, had a wonderful experience, and that was to see this lioness on foot. We heard the alarm calling from the camp, and she and Steph, of course, were in there with Viam, and they went rushing towards the alarm calls, and there they found a lioness, seemingly on the hunt. Now, Scott also had tracks of another lion going north across the boundary into Buffelshoek. So whether this lioness has been split from them or whether that was another pride coming on, I'm not sure. Now, 16-year-old Kari, you're in Costa Rica, and as we drive along searching for signs of this lioness, you want to know what Brian's favorite animal is. Brian? What is the warthog? Really?
I love warthogs.
Oh, Brian loves warthogs. Okay, any particular reason, Brian?
No, it's always just piqued my interest.
They pique your interest, they have the right vibe.
Yeah.
Right, warthogs, there we go. And you also want to know what our scariest, or my scariest experience has been. Well, my scariest experience ever, I suppose, was probably breaking up with a girlfriend at one stage, but I mean, that of course is not what you mean. You mean the scariest experience in the bush. And my scariest experiences in the bush have normally revolved around actually elephants or buffalo that I have surprised on foot. Now, when they surprise you on foot, of course, no, when you surprise them on foot, they can get quite upset and come towards you, and that can be a quite hairy situation. So I've had a few incidences like that, probably when some buffaloes stand up and they look at you and they come a few steps forward. That is pretty terrifying. But this is not a particularly terrifying place, and one of the most unterrifying things in the bush, two of the most unterrifying things in the bush, one being Jamie Patterson, the other some giraffe. Let's go and take a look.
How very alliterative. Jamie and the giraffe. Well, Tammy, I hope that you are still watching, because sighting is for you and all of those who are fans of the tallest creature that we find out here on the Sabi Sands. A lovely large male giraffe, complete with an accompaniment or a crown of oxpeckers settled on the top of his head. There you can see those bald patches around the top of those horns, or ossicones as they are officially known. And that is what tells us that, or one of the factors that tells us that you are looking at a male giraffe and not a female. They tend to rub the top of their ossicone smooth. And there you can see the oxpeckers hopping around on the top of his head, making sure to help keep him tick and parasite, if not free, then at least reduce the amount. And what I love about watching giraffes like this when they're ruminating is if you look really, really carefully, as he swallows this next mouthful, which he will do. No, don't. Ah, that wasn't very considerate, boy. I was about to say, if you look carefully, you'll be able to see the bulge of the next ball of cud as he brings it up that long, long neck, using a powerful reverse peristalsis to bring it up against gravity. Well, that was terribly inconvenient. Very camera shy, mister. Just the little nostrils peeking out and the long eyelashes. This also gives me the perfect opportunity to do exactly what my plan is for the start of this afternoon's drive, which is actually to sit and listen for as long as possible to see if I can catch any sound of Tundi and Tingana mating. My suspicion would be that they're in this drainage line. Let's see if I can get you another slightly clearer view. Oh dear. He's hidden himself perfectly. Here we go. Hello. Pecking away at the top of the prominent bulge on this giraffe's skull. Males, it's one of the other ways, apart from those thicker and more defined ossicones at the top of his head, much more solid looking than those of a female. But that lump on the top of the head also serves a very similar purpose, and is used when giraffe participate in what's known as necking, where they has a far more violent connotation than the human version of necking. Generally, they swing their heads around and smack each other on the sides, the rump and the legs. And the amount of momentum that they gather is phenomenal. Now, we're looking at our South African subspecies of giraffe. It is the only one that we find here. about the fact that there are different types throughout Africa. This is quite a significant mouthful he's munching. It's taking a long time to chew this ball of cud. Well, Leo, it's a matter that is up for debate, and it tends to oscillate, depending on which scientific paper you read, between 7 and about 9. Now, Leo, what I should do is list all of them off the top of my head, and for some reason the only one I can think of apart from the Rothschild, and there's the Rothschild, the Maasai giraffe, the South African giraffe. And Leo, if you give me a moment, my brain will dredge up the memories of the remaining names of the subspecies. I should know them. I do know them off by heart. I'm just having a little struggle for now. But yes, Leo, it depends on who you ask. And subspecies are one of those tricky little things that tend to vex evolutionary biologists and scientists. And hold on a second, Leo. The names are starting to creep back to me. What did I say? I said South African, Rothschild, Maasai, the Thornycroft, the Kordofan, the Nubian, the West African, the Angolan, and the reticulated. There you go, that's 9 of them for you. But some of those are contested in terms of what makes a subspecies and what is just a slight color variation. Because even with our local giraffe population, we've got a nice dark male here, but they come with their own varieties of colors and spot patterns. I'm sure some of you have noticed the more star-shaped spots of that one male that we've been seeing regularly that has been courting the females. And this gentleman has much more defined borders along his spots, and one very peaceable, or 2 very peaceable oxpeckers sitting on its head. Well, there you go. Paul's question that stems further from the question that Leo asks. Paul wants to know, are these Thornycroft or are they Rothschild's giraffe? And the answer, Paul, is neither. It is actually a subspecies known as the South African giraffe. I always want to call it the Saharan giraffe. Not the Saharan, sorry, the what do I want to call it? A bushveld giraffe. That's always the name that pops into my head, but it's officially known as the South African giraffe. The Rothschild and the Thornycroft subspecies occurring further north and towards the more central areas of the country. Yeah, lots of oxpeckers fluttering around, hoping to join the party. Chirping away, and I spoke about this morning on the bushwalk and the value of listening to the sounds of the oxpecker. This poor giraffe. Sorry, I'm just looking. He has 1, 2, 3, 4, and they've all taken off, fluttering off. At one point there, our gentleman giraffe had about 5 oxpeckers sitting on his head. What a tolerant gentleman. And the one remaining oxpecker, king of the castle, sitting at the top. Oh, 2, sorry, there were 2, so that means he must have had 6 on his head. And I might be imagining things, but nope, he did it again. He's winking at us. Definitely, I think he's winking at you, Dave.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, definitely. He decided to plant himself behind a bush and then give us a teasing wink in our direction, as if to say, yeah, you will only film my head today. And there we go. I wanted to show you the way that the ball of cud that he's currently chewing moves down the neck, and the next one is brought up. Unfortunately, he's decided to make that impossible for us to do. But we have got a lovely view of those wonderful long eyelashes. And Adrian, or Adrien, sorry, please correct me if you want to, just let me know if I'm saying your name wrong. I think it's Adrien. You were wondering, how do you tell the difference between a male and a female giraffe? Now, the best way, because this is quite often the view that you have of a giraffe, is to have a look at those ossicones on the top of its head. And where they are thick and well defined, with a bald patch on the top, that usually denotes a male. The females have thinner ossicones with tufts of hair that hide the top part of it. They haven't been rubbed smooth by fighting in the same way the males have. The other way, Adrian, is the usual way, with most mammal species, I'm sure as you know, it's not always that easy. For example, elephants have internal testicles. So do hippo, so do rhino. And make it a little bit tricky, but in the case of the giraffe, as shy as he is being, there is also the obvious difference, and it's quite clear in giraffe if you do manage to get that particular view of them. I've also read a theory about the shape of their backs and the fact that maybe males have slightly more flat flat back in the case of the males compared to the sloping back of the females. And Randall, I mentioned that this was the tallest species that we get out here. And Randall, who's watching in Illinois, would like to know, well then, how tall does a giraffe get? And the answer is up to about 5-ish meters in height, right to the top of their head. Their shoulder height is probably in the region of 2.5 to 3 meters. And the head height adds another extra 2 or so meters on top of that, if not 2.5. Randall, to convert that, since you are from Illinois and therefore do not work in the metric system, to give you a rough conversion, it is about 15 to 16 feet for a relatively average sized giraffe. Yes, I'm talking about you, boy. It's interesting, this is the exact spot where I saw that dark colored female a couple of days ago, or just before I went on leave actually. She's far more skittish than he is. He's not really being uncooperative. He just happened to want to eat those particular leaves in that area. And Leo's got a really, really good question. As the clouds have been rolling in this afternoon, bringing, as always, empty or fairly empty promises of rain. Leo's got a very good point. Since they are so incredibly tall, do they ever get struck by lightning? Or do they instinctively know which areas to avoid? Leo, they do get struck by lightning. It is in fact quite a common cause of death. Less so in this mixed bush willow woodland that is our habitat and our ecosystem. But in areas where there are large clearings, it is not at all uncommon for giraffe to be killed in thunderstorms. And in fact, that applies to quite a few of the animal species. I once came across what I could only describe as almost carnage. I walked out and found a load of dead impala all scattered around under this burnt and damaged tree. And my only conclusion was that they had been struck by lightning. They hadn't even been fed on yet. There were about 10 dead impala around a very large tree. So instinct doesn't necessarily protect them. It was a very interesting sight. It wasn't particularly pleasant, and I have to say that the smell was quite interesting, quite overwhelming. I also participated once in game capture to capture some giraffe that were being moved since the rest of the group had actually been wiped out in lightning strikes. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with South African climates, the storms out here can be absolutely phenomenal, awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time. Those of us from Joburg are particularly well nuanced. And while I was visiting my parents there over the last few days, we had 2 massive thunderstorms that had the animals cowering under the beds, and in fact I think took out the pool motor. There was a very large flash and bang and click, and all the lights went out. Thank you, boy. You're off on a mission. I wonder if he knows where the leopards are hiding. I bet you he does. But giraffe know how to keep their secrets. Well, I'm going to try for one last view of our gentleman, since he's being so pleasant. While I do that, ooh, Jigger, just for those of you well versed in the mechanics of cars, Jigger's universal joint has decided to start going. So we're going to be very, very gentle with Jigger. Now, having chatted a little bit about the different subspecies, it's raised one more question in Pamela's mind. Are there any giraffe in North Africa? Now, there would have been at one stage, and of course the name has come from those Greek explorers, or the Arabic explorers, who sort of were moving about in the northern parts of Africa. I have to be completely honest with you, Pamela. I'm pretty sure there are still established populations there, but there are, of course, the further north into those areas of Africa that you go, not counting. I'm talking more about the sub-Saharan and the Ethiopia, Eritrea, those sorts of areas. Anywhere caught up in civil strife or civil conflict, their wildlife populations automatically suffer. And something like a giraffe would definitely count as a meal for a lot of desperate people. I'm fairly certain there are still surviving populations. There are some amazing African parks in that area of the world that have considerably large protected areas and great areas of bushveld. I'm sure that there are giraffe populations around up there. It's on my wish list of places to go and explore those further northern areas that I've never been to. And I think we shall leave our gentleman giraffe. That also is very nicely alliterative. But before I do, Whitney has a question about subspecies and species, and she was saying, with all of these subspecies of giraffe, and you did mention zebra, and I'm going to get to those in a second, Whitney, but you meant particularly with subspecies of giraffe, do they ever interbreed? And that's the thing. That is where a lot of the confusion comes in terms of the subspecies versus species classification. It's always that fine dividing line, and one of the definitions that evolutionary biologists and biologists use is whether or not a species will mate with another or mate with that particular animal in terms of deciding if it is a species, if it is a different species or just a subspecies. I'm sure I could have worded that better, Whitney. I hope you followed what I was trying to say there. Essentially, yes, that all of the subspecies of giraffe can interbreed, they can produce, and they produce viable offspring. So a lot of different species, for example, a horse and a donkey, then can interbreed to produce a mule. Sorry, Whitney. That didn't sound like mating leopards, actually. That sounded more like impala entertaining themselves. It was a sound, but not the proper which is my best mating leopard impression. I hope you all enjoyed it. Something that I do on a regular basis and generally don't do very well. Whitney, sorry, yes, to get back to your question, I got completely distracted by those impala acting silly. It's not rutting time. I don't know why they're making such a noise. Whitney, with the species of zebra, they're not subspecies. The different species of zebra are distinctive species, but they can still reproduce. I think I might have to go and investigate there a little bit later. It's not the sound of mating leopards. It's almost certainly impala rutting. They're being incredibly vocal. And also, of course, many of our regular viewers will be familiar with the idea that quite often what's happened when Tingana's brought another female onto the property and into Karula's territory, even where that other female is her daughter, she doesn't really appreciate it. She very often follows the sound of them. And I wonder if that's not what brought her out this afternoon to decide to go and have a drink and then make her way down the Mulwati drainage line. That's a mystery that we may or may never solve. In the meantime, I'm going to head in that direction, but first I want to go and check a treehouse dam. As our regular viewers know, leopard mating is a thirsty and exhausting process. The female doesn't really let the male have a moment's breather. And Tingana, for all the aspersions cast upon his sterility over the last few weeks and second-guessing him, has certainly managed to keep up with all of the females in the area. But it's a hot day today. It is 36 degrees, which is 96 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. And I suspect that maybe top on Tingana's priority list might be to go and have a drink. So while we head to Treehouse Dam, let's find out how James's lion tracking is going.
There's a Savannah bottle in there. Now, we were We were trying desperately to find tracks of the lions in the bush there. I'm afraid we didn't find them at all. I didn't even find a sign of a lion, and I walked deep into the block, into the drainage line, and found nothing. So I think she's probably headed off north, perhaps towards where the rest of the pride were. That's I think what's happened. I'm not sure exactly. We're going to keep watching the road for tracks, and we'll see what pops out at the other end. What I do want to do as well, though, is show you some of these amazing cloud formations, and we'll do that once we get onto a high point, which will be Buffelshoek Cutline, and then we'll be able to show you some astonishing cloud formations as we go. Now, lions, of course, are not renowned for doing much. During a hot day like this, they would normally be sitting about or lying about underneath a bush, trying not to be too hot, and the most physical activity that they'll engage in is to shake their ears or so, flick that pom-pom tail about, and chase away the flies, of which there are many. Many of the insects are struggling in the lack of rain, but the flies, it would seem, are having a good time of it, especially these little biting flies. I'm not sure what kind they are exactly. They're deeply unpleasant, and I wish for them nothing but the most unpleasant demise. Now, Donna, you have been watching for a while, and obviously you know the Nkuhuma Pride well, and you want to know about where Junior is and if anyone's heard from him. Now, for those of you who don't know, Junior is now a 4-year-old male lion. He's no longer a sub-adult, and he has left the Pride, which is totally normal, of course, but we don't know where he's gone. And Donna, the last I heard of him, he was on Mala Mala, and I don't think he was doing anything other than trying to stay out of the way of the Birmingham boys. I suspect that will remain the same, and he will eventually disappear off into Kruger, perhaps. I think that's actually probably where he is at the moment. He might come back every so often to visit the pride that he was born into, except I think it's probably got beyond that point. Well, one doesn't ever want to say definitely. And then there were 2 cheetah also asked after by Donna, but a different Donna, not the same Donna. Hello, Donna of the cheetah. We'll have Donna of the lions and Donna of the cheetah. Donna of the cheetah have not been heard of again since this morning. I'm pretty sure they're in the same place. I haven't heard anything further about them. We will be going sort of towards the northeast at some stage, and then down towards the Torchwood Cutline on the Gari Main, which is of course the southeast, and we'll see if we can't pick up something there, but I've heard nothing further about them during the course of the day. I'm just peering into the bush, of course, trying to find that tawny shape. Now, Dawn, you're in Chicago, and I asked about travel to the Sabi Sands, and you're coming to the Sabi Sands soon. Dawn, that's wonderful news. I'd love to know which lodge you're going to stay at. And you want to know about etiquette in the bush and what you should and shouldn't do. Well, Dawn, we dress for dinner, so you must be sure to bring black tie for your dinners. In the evenings, then, of course, women are expected to wear long dresses throughout the day. Despite the heat, a nice sort of camisole umbrella is also a good idea if we're on drive. There are some kudu over there. And the other thing you need, Dawn, of course, is to understand that I'm talking absolute nonsense. Those are kudu, of course, young male and some females, or 1 female, 2 young males and a female. Dawn, there's no real etiquette other than the most important thing that you can remember when you come out here is that you must ask as many questions as you want to of your guide, and you must immerse yourself as completely as possible, trying to spend a bit of time on foot and try and just dig into the knowledge base of the tracker and the ranger that you're with, because I think that's the way you're going to get the most out of your trip. In terms of etiquette, well, you'll get a safety briefing for game drive, so I mean, it's pretty obvious stuff. Don't stand up, don't shout at the animals, don't feed them oranges and that sort of thing. And they'll give you all of that before you arrive. And then The only other thing I would suggest, Dawn, is that you read as much about the area as you can before you come, because that way you can ask more in-depth questions and you can get a much better idea and a much more sort of immersive and holistic view of the Sabi Sands and the bush in general. Look at this male. Isn't he wonderful? He's very relaxed. Very young. That horn has just about done a half turn, so he's only about a year old. Now, the kudu's horns do 2 twists, at least a full twist every 2 years. He's got about half a twist there, so I'd put him at a year. There goes the female. Very, very kind of them to walk across the road in front of us at such a gentle pace. And clearly, if they are sitting in here, they're not particularly worried about being nailed by some lions that could be close by. Now, the kudu have crossed over the road, and Brian, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Jamie has got some of your favorite animals. Let's head across to some pigs.
I'm actually quite ashamed to admit that I had absolutely no idea that they were Brian's favorite animals. I will make a definite, constant attempt now that I know that to show Brian warthogs. Now, you may be seeing one on your screens. There are, in fact, 2 warthogs there. The second is hiding in that pit off to the left of the one warthog, where the elephants have dug through to get to water. That's wonderful little hidey hole that is in there, and I don't think you can even, oh, there you can see its bottom. You can see its little bottom sticking out over the top there. Yep, there you go, wiggling. Hello. And back down again. Quite an interesting little hidey hole that. I once discovered, to my shock, a wild dog sleeping in there once. I could see the rest of the pack across the dam, and I blithely went driving across, only to find that there was a little wild dog sleeping in that muddy wallow. And that's exactly what that warthog there is doing, is enjoying a nice drink. One of the few naturally occurring dams, although it has, of course, been helped along by human intervention. But it comes with the underground water that has flowed down from the seep lines in the area, including that of around Zoe's Road. And what that means is when the elephants come by and have a nice deep dig in the mud, they bring up fresh, clean, clear water to the benefit of all of the animals, including these little warthog. Spoken before about them having the potential to be fairly hard hit by the drought. There's a lot of thin-looking warthogs wandering about. This one is nice and in good condition. Hello, Piggy. I can't... Oh, there we go. Bit of a fright. I was looking for some spotted cats sleeping around there, but I don't think that that's going to be the case. You can see they're nervous. You can see it in their body language, that constantly alert, ears moving about, head casting side to side to check for any signs of threats. There were in fact 3 little warthog when we first drove up, but one of them dashed away from us. Generally, I've noticed a trend that the warthog in this area are particularly skittish for some reason. And it's only recently that we've been starting to habituate. Look how nervous it is. Why is it so nervous? What can you smell? Now, I have to be honest, I've just spoken to Brent. He also didn't see any tracks crossing into the area. We're going to try and get hold of Sean from Arathusa, who originally reported it, and see if we can figure out maybe we've got the wrong message about exactly where those leopards crossed into Voyatella. Either way, I think my plan will be to drive a little way up the Mulwati drainage line, far from where Karula was seen disappearing in. I think that the reason they're so nervous is because they're so vulnerable in this position. Well, their nerves definitely feeling a little bit shot, especially if they are smelling or maybe even hearing the sounds of the leopards mating in the vicinity. As I said, it's a noisy, quite a violent experience witnessing 2 leopards mate. The female tends to get somewhat upset with the male, very often turns around and smacks him in the face and kicks him very hard in the belly with her back legs. And that, of course, is because he comes with a barbed penis that actually causes her quite severe discomfort during the act. And so she turns around and kicks him, and that's why you get that brrr sound as they growl at each other. Now, interestingly, James Richards has asked a very, very salient question. I mentioned that sound might attract Karula. James would like to know, would it not attract the attention of the Nkahuma lions? And James, I didn't think of that, actually. I got so distracted by the thought of managing to locate these leopards that thought didn't cross my mind, and it's a really good point. Because yes, it could. Generally what you'll find with situations like that, James, is that it's sub-adults that go and investigate, particularly sub-adult males. Generally the females are less likely to be bothered to go out of their way, particularly on a hot day like this afternoon. So it's possible, but because they're just a group of females, unlikely. But James, you've just cast some interesting thoughts about those sounds that we heard earlier that I said were impala. And I think I'm going to be going to investigate those in a bit. But just one last look at our little bathing warthog. As he is climbing down into the hole, and you've got a slightly clearer view. He's remained fairly relaxed in terms of actually letting us observe them. One's still not sure, but the other tucking in to a good solid drink. Hello, little warthog. And just to finish up my answer to James Richards' question, in terms of attracting the attention of the Nkahumas and distance, I can't give you an exact distance, of course, because I'm not entirely sure where these leopards crossed. I haven't seen any of the tracks that were reported. But James, it would be roughly equate to about 2.5 kilometers. So in miles, that's about 1 or so mile in terms of the distance between where I suspect the leopards might be and where the lions were left this morning. Although I believe that James is saying he hasn't found any sign of them. I only saw one Nkahuma lioness, and I know that Scott did say that he had tracks crossing Buffelshoek cut line. So it's distinctly possible that lioness was just straggling and decided to go and join the rest of the pride further to the north. There you go, you can see the warthog having a wonderful time. It's okay, little warthog. Little sub-adult. Looks like a little sub-adult male. So most likely the son of the female on the left, still with his mom. I'm fairly certain that looks like a female to me. So, since we chatted about giraffe, male and female warthog, those little protrusions that give the warthogs their names are not warts, they're sort of knobbly pieces of cartilage and hard connective tissue. But females have 2, males have 4. So that is a female that was on the left, and the little male digging in the mud. Now, for those of you wondering a little bit about my rather peculiar leave schedule that occurred over the last few days, Tammy Peterson was wondering why I only took such a short 4-day leave in this particular instance. And Tammy, there's a couple of reasons. One was that Graham and Emily Wallington are in fact on djuma along with Peter Braat. So the directors of our company are here, and we've been having some interesting meetings about the exciting future prospects to come, and you'll just have to stay tuned. I can't tell you any more than that at the moment, Tammy. So that was certainly meetings that I did not wish to miss. Plus the fact that for once, it seems as though Brent and myself will be able to coincide with our leave schedules for a couple of days. So we will actually be able to go away together for more than 2 days at a time, which would be really incredibly pleasant and something I am looking forward to. And then there was also the fact that I desperately needed to get home to visit my wonderful parents and help them pack up the house that they are planning on downscaling and selling. And the interesting thing about the life of a guide or a ranger is that generally most of us tend not to have a fixed address for a very long period, extended period of our lives. Very common for us to move about from place to place, which is something that is one of the perks of the job. It's certainly never boring, But it does mean that you end up storing all of your belongings in various places. In this case, it was my parents' house. So I just had to rush back and help them, not leave them, to organize all of my belongings, which is a task that is daunting to the most courageous of people, and in fact I found nearly impossible. As in terms of organization, I wouldn't say that I'm the tidiest, most organized person in the world. I think that might even be putting it mildly, and I'm sure my mom would actually be able to reaffirm that. It's still thirsty. Thirsty, thirsty little warthog. Rita! That is wonderful news. Rita is one of our regular viewers and has just sent us the most wonderful message. Rita tells us that she is a self-confessed Kruger junkie and will be back in Kruger for 7 days. Never fear, Janet, although it has been a very serious drought. I have to be completely honest to you, Janice. In terms of game viewing, it may be one of the best opportunities you will ever get. And that's because the vegetation is severely lacking, which means that you can see far further into the bush. Plus, you will be coming in